Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at the 1998 film John Carpenter's Vampires. This movie has a tomato meter rating of 40% and an audience score of 47%, making it completely rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. I would say I don't disagree that it's rotten by traditional standards, critic or audience, but I would entertain that this movie is worth watching. Now, a couple of warnings. This isn't a movie that is in any regards politically correct. It wasn't in 1998, and it's certainly not now. Particularly, it has a healthy dose of domestic abuse and perhaps outright misogyny in it. It plays that up heavily. It's part of the plot. It's part of the actual fun of the movie itself. This is John Carpenter. I don't know if he anticipated this might rub people the wrong way in the future. But this is John Carpenter being John Carpenter, and this is in a lot of ways the main star James Woods being James Woods and being allowed by John Carpenter to improvise a lot of his own work, to let himself go over the top, to deviate from the script and just go wild. It is wildly fun. It is wildly fun for anybody that's a fan of James Woods, to see how crazy he can really get. He could have never done this in a movie today. Nobody would let him. It certainly wouldn't have made it to the screen if he had done this today. So, it's part of the mystique and, the mystique and the legend of James Woods, whether you like that or you absolutely hate that. Personally, I enjoyed it. It could be actually a subversive guilty pleasure to this day. There are some scenes that are just outright, they are R-rated, but they are misogynistic and abusive in a way that nobody's brave enough to do something like this today. Nobody, and certainly no producer or distribution company would be allowing this to hit the theater, even if somebody were brave enough to do this on film. It just doesn't fit with the modern political climate. So in any case, it's highly enjoyable. This is a vampire movie that kind of changes the genre on its head. In most vampire movies, the team of vampire hunters are the victims. They're on the run. They're outmatched by the vampires. The vampires are the big bad. They've got the upper hand, for the horror effect, for the tension. In this regard, the movie starts right off with the vampire hunters being anti-heroes, rather despicable anti-heroes, entertaining to watch, but completely dominating vampires, just wiping vampires out, having no mercy on them, kicking a dead dog when it's dead already, that sort of thing. And they're very vindictive. And it's, you could say it would be comedic, except there's so much gore, even more gore than a John Carpenter movie is known for. So it doesn't come across as comedic. It just comes across as complete insanity. But it's fantastic entertainment just for the entertainment factor. Again, we'll get into the rotten reviews because I want to see just, I can see that it's got a 47% audience score, but I want to see just how many people might have been offended by this. I'm not offended by it. I can take it as a work of fiction, but I would imagine some people are. Just as a side note, I want to show that this did spawn a sequel in 2002 called Vampires Los Muertos, the Dead. It's even more rotten, and I would agree it's rotten and deserves to be rotten. The main star, instead of James Woods, you have John Bon Jovi, the rocker. Yeah, I remember it being vaguely entertaining when it came out as, a cable movie or something on the Sci-Fi Channel. But I wouldn't seek this one out unless you just want to drink and laugh, because who knows, it might be good like that. But I'm just letting you know that this was popular enough in its day that somebody actually tried to do another sequel with John Bon Jovi, of all people. Going into the rotten reviews, uh, which the most recent one is September 21st of 2019. 5 stars. Pole smoking fashion victim earns 5 stars. I'm not sure what they mean by that. I wouldn't give this 5 stars or 4 stars or even three. Well, okay, I would give this 3 stars for the entertainment factor, for watching James Woods go totally crazy. And just for that, I would say 3 stars. If I were just rating this on the rest of the movie, I would say 2.5 stars, because it's not by any means some kind of, Academy Award winner for visual effects or for acting. But just for the sheer craziness of it, I give this 3 stars personally. 2.5 if you're just talking about, aspects of film production. 2.5's worth watching, though, in my opinion. 4 stars, underrated and very 90s. Yeah, it's very 90s, but again, it's John Carpenter doing something even crazier than he was known to do. It's a little too weird to just say it's just 90s. It's got a 90s look to it. The way the film, the lighting, the camera angles, it looks like a 90s movie. It could have been any other 90s movie. Hell, it could have been a Lethal Weapon movie, with the way the lighting and the camera work are. But, that's where the similarities end, because you cannot say 90s movies have this level of, what you would call domestic violence and misogyny. And they certainly don't have James Woods going this far. But anyway, let's move on. 1 star. Extremely disappointing and lame movie from Carpenter, who once upon a time directed such superior efforts as The Thing, 1982, and Halloween, 1978. Sad. Well, this certainly isn't anything like those movies. This is like Carpenter before he went totally, totally to crap. The next thing that he did that sticks out to me that I'm going to talk about in this time period is Ghosts of Mars. This is not as bad as that. It's nowhere near as bad as that. This movie's actually enjoyable. It actually has logic that, for the most part, makes sense. It's just over the top crazy and gory. And it's like somebody that really hated vampires wrote this. I don't mean somebody that hated the genre of vampires. I mean somebody that, somebody that looked like a vampire did something to them as a kid and they need to get their revenge. This is like a revenge on vampires movie. Like it's personal to whoever wrote this. That's what it feels like. 1.5 stars. A comic book type caper in which a posse hunts down vampires for a living. This is at the lower end of John Carpenter's filmography. It feels more intent with slick visuals and trying to come across as cool than being a thought-provoking piece of cinema with any kind of substance. We get nods to the Western genre with the posse. We even get a reference to the Searchers. That's the deepest and most thought-provoking thing in the whole film. The only people this film is of interest to are the nerdier. Well, okay, yeah, John Carpenter is trying to make it like a Western type movie. He's got that in the theme. They're in a Western type environment. I mean, yes, they are in modern days, modern 1998 time period, but it's got a Western aesthetic to it, and it's got like a Western posse roundup type movie theme in it. This is this is clashing with the outright gore and the crazy over-the-top like domestic abuse scenes. I don't know what to make of it, except it's John Carpenter and James Woods having a great time, and they just don't give a shit, and it's fantastic to watch, in my opinion. 1.5 stars. No, I give this a 2.5 stars. It's not a sci-fi movie by any means. 2.5 stars. Carpenter's vampire flick has all the right old school elements from a retro style of his own roots. And while it approaches a certain Western Mexican aesthetic similar to a certain 1996 Robert Rodriguez film, it couldn't help itself on throwing away a perfectly digestible popcorn gorish tone opportunity, avoiding actual horror elements that Carpenter used to manage so well, even when the film has James Woods' badass charm in the lead role. Well, I agree a little bit. Robert Rodriguez could have tried something like this, but there's no way he would have done the domestic abuse stuff and thought that that would make it into the theater. This did back in the day. This is like Robert Rodriguez doing something kind of crazy like Grindhouse, but putting a lot more offensive, unpolitically correct stuff in it. Yeah, this is like take this a step beyond what Rodriguez did, but yeah, you could see it could be him, but gone crazy. 5 stars. Scary, funny, and entertaining throughout. Great performance by James Woods. The low tomato meter rating shows how clueless critics can be. No, I think the critics like they weren't gonna like this no matter what. No critic is going to. First of all, it's a vampire movie. Secondly, it's not like the classic Dracula. It's like 1990s vampire killers. There's no critic out there that's going to try to say this is like an Academy Award winner or praise this. I'm surprised that even 20% of the Rotten Tomatoes critics, got something out of this because they're far too snooty for this. 2.5 stars. Sometime in the 1990s, John Carpenter started to lose his touch, and with vampires, it makes sense. I don't think it's necessarily a bad film, but it's kind of sloppily done. The screenplay could have been tightened up. There was a lot of slow motion, not necessary. Some shots could have been done better, and even the acting could have used another take. Vampires is watchable, but could have been so much more. I agree largely. Some of that, though, what I've heard is that almost 2/3 of the budget was cut from this production, right before it started. This wasn't expected. So this movie was supposed to be, done with a 60% larger budget. And at the last minute, that money got removed for whatever reason. And that's why it didn't, I don't know, resonate better with people that even enjoyed how crazy it was. They probably cut corners in a lot of places. I don't know if there could have been better effects. I don't think the effects were bad in this. Maybe it should have had more attention put into world building. I mean, it is said in the film that, it's shown that James Woods' posse of vampire hunters is actually employed in some way, indirectly, in some clandestine way by the Catholic Church. Certainly the Catholic Church wouldn't want anything to do with this movie or anything going on in it, but that's what's shown in the movie. I don't know what, a 60% greater budget would have done, but you have to take into account that that's what happened to this film. 2 stars. 11-year-olds like this movie. I am no longer 11. It's a little bit much for 11-year-olds, so I don't know about that. When I saw this movie, I was almost 30. Everybody I knew, even people 15 years older than me, enjoyed it and thought it was over the top crazy, and we're talking about it at work. So, it was intended to be all crazy. It was not intended for 11-year-olds by any stretch of the imagination. 2.5 stars. It's kind of fun. I'll agree. 4 stars. Loads of fun and terrifying moments. James Woods is the movie. That scene with Cheryl Lee, damn. Yeah, one of the characters is basically in the process of becoming a vampire, and they just abuse the hell out of her. At the same time, not only do they abuse her, but they actually switch from abusing her to being in love with her. It's some crazy stuff, and they play it serious. And you would never be able to do this in a present day movie. 5 stars. Another great John Carpenter classic. Yeah, if you're a John Carpenter fan, this one's high up on your list just because it's so crazy. It's crazier than his other movies. It's certainly not scary. I don't know why some people say, that it was it's in the horror genre, yes, but it doesn't actually scare you. I mean, no adult I know has seen this and said that they felt it scary. No, this is straight up like over the top gore action. This isn't any scarier than Dusk Till Dawn. It's very similar in some ways, unconventional like Dusk Till Dawn. But again, this goes in a couple of directions that Dusk Till Dawn never attempted to. and it's likable for that. It's very entertaining. 1 star. James Woods was horribly miscast in the role of a tough guy. The least talented Baldwin was awful, as one would expect. Um, no, I think it happened to be that James Woods was cast perfect for this. I mean, if John Carpenter wanted to go crazy, he picked the right guy. Hell, he let him improv, and it shows and it works. No, I don't think he was miscast. As far as Baldwin, yeah, all the Baldwin brothers are forgettable. They have hit and miss roles in films. Baldwin's role in this is really crazy, particularly the domestic abuse stuff. 4 stars. Good fun movie, good cast. 2 stars. James Woods is pretty funny, but this is more like a bad Tremors sequel. No, Tremors is more of a comedy. It's not as crazy as this. This takes itself seriously. 4 stars. You know, the more times I watch this, the more I come to really appreciate what it's got going for it. A couple of badasses posseing up and taking down the vampire across the desert wasteland. Directed by Carpenter with a score by him, it's the stuff of horror western fans' dreams. The claims of misogyny aren't completely baseless, but those offended need to actually sit back and look at the context from which it's coming, rather than just get butthurt at surface offenses. Okay, so there's a reference to it. Again, I think that, I'm certainly not sensitive to this stuff. I'm not what people would call woke. I think that thing that, trying to judge films on being woke or not is completely ridiculous. But in this case, saying that there's just a little misogyny, no, 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 no. This is like trying to serve it to you. There's no question about it. 5 stars. Absolutely a great movie. Have watched a million times and then some. Well, okay, it might have its fans. This is in danger of becoming a cult classic. If it's not already, I could see this becoming a cult classic of a younger generation, perhaps Generation Z, because when they get exposed to this, especially how it goes against modern political correctness, yeah, they might latch on to this as a cult favorite. 3 stars. It was okay, interestingly stuck in its time, but okay. Some interesting additions to the vampire canon. Yeah, it had some interesting sequences we hadn't seen before as far as killing vampires. This posse of vampire killers actually had a mythology to them, like they had trained and done this many times before. They worked as a team. They knew their stuff. They knew how to spear vampires, hook them to a truck winch, and pull them right out into the sunlight. This went off like a clockwork operation. That was the most fascinating part at the beginning, that you saw these badass vampire hunters doing this textbook, almost like SWAT team style raids against vampire nests, and just having no mercy, brutally no mercy. Again, like somebody wrote this that really had it out for vampires in a personal way, and it was fantastic to watch. 3 stars. One of John Carpenter's most entertaining movies, in my personal opinion. It's got great acting, and the best guy in this flick is without a doubt James Wood as Jack. And for the characters, they're all very memorable and likable. I can't exactly see why people didn't really like this flick. I think it's good. It's a pretty underrated flick. Overall, if you're a vampire fan, then this one is that ain't to miss, recommended. They're wrong in this review, probably because they're younger. They weren't around at the time. This was a liked movie. This was a popular, liked movie at the time, despite the fact that Rotten Tomatoes, critics' reviews and Rotten Audience Review. You wouldn't know it if you weren't around at the time, but in 1998, this was a popular movie. So anybody that says it wasn't paying attention, they weren't around at the time, or they're just ashamed of the way it rubs totally against the political grain now. But no, this was a popular movie at the time. 2 stars. Garbled vampire flick is a far cry from Carpenter's class thrillers of the past. Well, yeah, this is not. This is certainly not The Thing, and it's not Halloween. Particularly, it's not The Thing. The Thing is more of a textbook, straight-up sci-fi horror. This is almost made by somebody different. It wasn't, but it feels like something somebody totally different made. It's totally over the top crazy. So yeah, if you're expecting The Thing, you were really shocked on this one, you'd probably give it 1 star. 2 stars. I think this is the point where John Carpenter just made whatever he wanted and he was okay with it. Yeah, I think so, because Ghosts of Mars, you saw what happened after that. He was like almost like a plane spiraling down towards the ground, and he had just started his tailspin at this point, so his film was still wildly entertaining, but it was already spiraling down as far as his filmmaking prowess. I agree with that. 1.5 stars. So many weird cinematic choices are made here. A subpar Southern Gothic, but if you want to show someone what cool looks like in Texas in the mid to late 90s, you can show them the opening scene of this film. I don't know if I would drag Texas into this. It feels more like Arizona and New Mexico to me, personally. And it wasn't supposed to be cool. It was just supposed to be crazy, over the top Western vampire gore. Cool, I wouldn't have put that term on it even at the time when the movie was in the theater. 4 stars. James Wood at his sarcastic best. Yeah, he's at his best here. This is the real James Woods when you let him do what he wants. 2.5 stars. This is probably the best film of John Carpenter's later work. That is not a compliment. It just means I didn't feel a constant urge to pry my eyeballs out with a spoon. The plot is weak and the characters cliched, and it never captures the dramatic sense of importance that it truly craves. Man, I really miss his older films. He was the best once upon a time. Yeah, and wait till you saw Ghosts of Mars. 3 stars. While it isn't necessarily a bad film, I have a lot of problems with it. This is one of those films that likes to make note of what other films think about how to take care of vampires. The problem with this is that it goes overboard and kind of makes its own rules. It ignores other rules that it considers silly and makes its own rules that it considers important. For example, vampires don't have to be invited in. For whatever reason, nobody carries silver bullets. That doesn't work on vampires and werewolves. They're nitpicking some weird stuff here, because almost every vampire movie is picking and choosing what rules to use. If there were a book out there called Vampire Canon of Hollywood, you'll find that almost every director and producer nitpicks and cherry picks their own particular rule set they want to use for their movie. You even see this between movies in the same franchise, where they, like Blade, for example, where they will establish the rules in the first opening act or two of the movie, and then go on and like add different rules or swap it around in a later installment. The vampire genre is like some other genres of horror. There is no canon textbook out there that you have to follow, so this is a completely bullshit review. No, as a producer or director, you're allowed to establish your own rule set for your vampires. The only thing that the audience asks is that you are consistent and you stick to your own rules. That's the preference. That's how you keep the audience involved. 5 stars. This movie is total badass John Carpenter fun. Anyone who would give this gem a bad rating obviously takes themselves way too seriously. I would agree on that. Not on 5 stars, but yeah, if you take yourself and your sensibilities too seriously, then yeah, this isn't the movie for you. This movie is to like push your sensibilities, to show you something you haven't seen before, and it does a good job of that. 4 stars. A hard-kicking vampire assault in the name of James Woods, strikingly resemblance to From Dusk Till Dawn, in Woods' utterly hard-talking language and rough behavior. There is no lack of killing, blood, or madness, pure action entertainment, which actually worked out pretty good. I'll agree largely here. This is like From Dusk Till Dawn if James Woods was allowed to like do what he wanted with it. It is not something that I could ever see being done again in today's political climate. 3.5 stars. Winching vampires into daylight. Yeah, that was the first time we saw that. They attempted it again in the sequel with Bon Jovi. But yeah, this is what this movie is known for right off the bat. Spearing a vampire with a crossbow. using a truck winch to rip him out into the daylight. That was a first. It's iconic. To me, it is. 3 stars. The opening scene is superb. Valak is one nasty piece of work, and I would shit myself if he was after me. Carpenter's score is textbook. The main reason that this flick is so enjoyable is because of the performance of James Woods. Agree and agree. 1 star, 2015, meh, nothing great or memorable about this film. Again, it was in its day. It was quite different than what we had seen up until 1998. 2 stars. You would think that if any horror maestro could pull off a film in which a testosterone-fueled group of vampire hunters chased down a 6-year-old head vampire, it would be John Carpenter, right? He was so confident he even put his name in the title, or at least the studio did, in order to sell a pretty shambolic display from just about everyone involved here. So a ragtag group of vampire hunters, led by Super Dick Jack Crow, ransack a vampire safe haven in the middle of nowhere and manage to wake up. Well, yeah, you're going into a plot synopsis and you're complaining about it. But yeah, you've described the movie, and that's what people like about it. You just didn't like it? Okay. 3 stars, enjoyable enough Carpenter flick. 4 stars, it had James Woods and a Baldwin brother, what's not to love. 4 stars, worthwhile blend of Western and vampire thriller, maybe not the best from Carpenter. Yeah, it's not Carpenter's best at all. The Thing probably would be. This could have been made by anybody and it would still be fantastic with or without John Carpenter. Really, it almost seems to me this should be James Woods, vampires, but that's not the way it worked out. 1.5 star. It seems Carpenter either is really on like The Thing, Halloween, or really off like this offering. All over the frickin' place, horror farce. Yeah, that's the thing. John Carpenter has some really fantastic hits, and then he has some really weird, off-putting movies that, although the critics didn't completely pan, the audience is just kind of scratching their head. So John Carpenter has always been kind of all over the place. 3.5 stars. This movie has a nice score and above average acting. I liked the plot, though this is in no way a horror or traditional scary flick. Think of it as more of an action-packed vampire western. Yeah, I'll agree. 3.5 stars. And another enjoyable and entertaining film from Carpenter with a brilliant performance from James Woods. It may take its plot a little too serious and some scenes seem cliche. No, it wasn't cliche. It was just that, we've seen so many vampire movies since then. They've borrowed a little bit from this one. Again, there's no book of vampire lore canon to go from. People pick and choose what elements of vampire lore from the movies to use in their world building. So just about everything's cliche now, including sparkling vampires. 5 stars. I'm angry it took me so long to see this. Somewhere a drive-in theater should show this and From Dusk Till Dawn as a double feature. Woods is fantastic. The flare-like flame bursts when the vampires hit sunlight is awesome. And once again, John Carpenter doesn't disappoint. This is a must-see if you missed out like I did. I'll agree with that. Not on 5 stars. But I'll agree that if you haven't seen this, if you weren't back around in 1998 to enjoy this in the theater, yeah, give this a shot. It's over the top crazy. 5 stars. Holy crap, this is a great movie. I can't believe all the bad things I hear about it. I put it up there with From Dusk Till Dawn. And coming from me, that's saying something. This movie is bloody, violent, action-packed, and at times downright funny. This is some of Mr. Carpenter's best work. In fact, his best since Big Trouble in Little China, which is as well awesome. I think Vampires should get much more praise than it does. It's truly great. Again, I'm saying that it might be that abusive stuff that's in the movie with Baldwin and the female vampire girl. I think if that wasn't in there, then it probably would be brought up more with From Dusk Till Dawn. But again, it's like people just kind of want to ignore that this exists because they don't want to get into, people attacking them because this is politically incorrect. So, it's like one of those movies that maybe in 10 or 15 years, when politics has changed, it'll come out and be a cult classic, but right now it's just too politically incorrect. 3 stars. First action vampire movie. No, not the first one, but it's got crazy action. 1 star. John Stakely's novel wasn't that good, but the adaptation is god-awful. Wood's Vampire Hunter is complete antithesis of Peter Cushing's classy Van Helsing, sleazy and boring like the whole movie. Well, yeah, it wasn't supposed to be Van Helsing. It was supposed to be a crazy-ass James Woods character just having no mercy on nests of vampires. He wasn't there to talk about it and eloquently, drive a stake through their heart all nice and clean and then walk away. He was there to just decapitate and shit all over vampires. And he would have shit down their throats if he could have. That's the attitude of these vampire killers. They had it out for vampires, truly. And the vampires had it out for them. You'll get that too. 3.5 stars. Not bad at all. Very slow to start, as most John Carpenter films, but an enjoyable film nonetheless. Don't get me wrong, it is cheesy beyond all reason, but if you like cheesy films, this film delivers. It feels like it maybe lays the camp on a little thick, and there is a forced romance in the film which feels a bit unnecessary but never drags on for too long. I have a feeling the book was better, but I had fun with this movie, so I don't understand all the hate. Well, when you bring up the forced romance, usually when we say forced romance, we're talking about, some kind of romantic subplot that the director has forced into the movie for a purpose. But no, in this case, when we say forced romance, we're talking about characters actually abusing a woman and then forcing her into the romance. Literally in the story. You have to check it out. That's what we mean by forced romance. You'll see if you watch it. 2.5 stars. The beginning and end are good. The middle drags for days. And can Cheryl Lee do a role where she is not being raped? I don't know, because this is the only film I remember seeing her in. She makes quite an impact. That's how I remember her and her name all these years later. So I'm guessing this was her main thing that she's known for. 1 star. Did I mention that I can't stand James Woods and Daniel Baldwin? Just proves that acting really doesn't get passed through the family genes. This might be one of the John Carpenter's worst. Daniel Baldwin, I agree, he's completely forgettable, a bit minor character in everything he's been in. But James Woods, no, he's more like an acquired taste. James Woods is like that old bottle of scotch that, doesn't sell very well, but there's people out there hunting it down, and they're going through old dilapidated houses and up into the attics to find this bottle of scotch. But most people don't care for it. He's an acquired taste, and people that really like him. 3 stars. A fun, vulgar, and silly good time with an Academy Award caliber performance by James Woods. Okay. 3.5 stars. James Woods hunting vampires in this horror western. That is one of John Carpenter's best movies in years. Yeah, if it's your taste, this is pretty awesome. If you want to see James Woods like just having no mercy on vampires and everybody else in his way, this is for you. 0.5 star. Ridiculously misogynistic for the late 90s. I agree, this is not representative of that time period. This is over the top. Tim Guinee is the only redeeming part of this mess of a movie. Cheryl Lee's character is called bitch, whore, and cunt on numerous occasions. This movie could have been fun, but it is an epic fail. I'm going to read my Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics now to cleanse my soul. Okay, if you're coming at this from the angle of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, then yeah, this one's going to blow your mind in a bad way for you, because this is like completely turning that on its head in every regard. But still, I'm a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. I'm sad that it's not out on Blu-ray and that it's not on even a streaming service without paying extra for it. I wish it would be remastered in Blu-ray. I would probably buy it just to watch it again from the beginning. I really like that show. And again, I like this movie too, so go figure. 3 stars. I will hunt you down, I will find you, and I will kill you. James Crow, the vampire slaying Liam Neeson. Yeah. He's got elements of that Liam Neeson, I will go to the ends of the earth to hunt you down, except James Woods does it in a really nasty fashion. 3.5 stars. John Carpenter's last good movie came in 1998. Vampire sees James Woods as a vampire slayer trained by the Catholic Church who is taking on the first vampire, essentially a super vampire. It is a solid action horror film and plenty of fun to boot. Woods is great in the lead, and the supporting cast is decent despite it featuring a lamer Baldwin brother pretty heavily. I liked this movie. It was a fun vampire movie, like From Dusk Till Dawn. I would recommend it. That's a fair review. It's not like telling you just how crazy and over the top it is. Again, it mentions the Catholic Church angle. Maybe that's the reason why people want to forget about this movie. You would also have to say that, just insinuating that the Catholic Church would approve even under the table of somebody like this James Woods character is over the top insanity by itself. So I don't even know if people want to go there and entertain that. You can talk about the Catholic Church, condoning like secret exorcism rituals, but that is like completely above board Sunday school stuff compared to them like endorsing this James Woods character and his movie. Um, so in any case, I'm going to call this one. I think this movie is completely enjoyable. I recommend it, especially if you're young enough where you haven't seen this. It's just some crazy good stuff. Leave your politics at the door. Yeah, it deserves to be rotten, but it's rotten and enjoyable. So I'm going to see you all on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.